We're back with former acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He is the author of a new book, The Threat: How the FBI Protects America in the Age of Terror and Trump. Good to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Start you off on some of the news of the week. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort was sentenced this week. He will also face sentencing in a D.C. court in the days to come. He was given 47 months. Far less than what is the sentencing guideline of up to 20 plus years. Is the length of time he will serve matching the crimes he's being accused of?
Well, I was really surprised by the sentence he was given. I think it's an incredibly lenient sentence in light not just of the offenses he was convicted for, but the additional offenses that he has pled guilty to in D.C. and the offenses he's acknowledged essentially in the sentencing process in Virginia that he's responsible for. So, like most people, I was shocked by how lenient the sentence was.
So it sounds like you're predicting that the D.C. court may add to those 47 months.
Well, there's no question he's going to get additional time from D.C. I don't think it's probably the job of the D.C. courts to rectify a mistake or something that was done in another jurisdiction. I'm sure that Judge Jackson will approach her sentence with just keeping her eye on the facts of that case. But there's no doubt he'll get additional time from that process.
In your book, The Threat, you write about some of the president's public comments about Paul Manafort in particular, and you frame it in one passage as possible witness tampering. You say you fear a judge will be influenced by some of the president's comments. Did you have any sense that that's what happened here with Judge Ellis?
I don't. But the point that I try to make in the book is to try to highlight how incredibly irresponsible and indeed corrosive statements like that from the chief executive are on the process and on the public's perception of the fairness and the effectiveness of the process. When the president engages in messaging like that, people can't help but step back and ask themselves that question that you just asked. Did that have an impact on the process or on the result in this case? We don't know the answer to that, but it introduces a level of doubt and insecurity into a system that we all need to depend upon to being fair and free.
The charges that Paul Manafort faced were in regard to financial crimes. Do you believe that he was a Russian asset?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that Mr. Manafort's extensive involvement with Ukrainian and Russian actors is highly suspicious. I think that that's something that we'll wait to see what the Mueller team opines on with their final conclusions.
Because the president seized on a comment made by Judge Ellis, who seemed to be just pointing out that the Russian potential links were not actually part of the trial that we have seen underway here. So you're saying there the president's comments were not actually accurate.
Well, that shouldn't be a surprise. I think that Judge Ellis was very careful to indicate that he was sentencing Mr. Manafort for the conduct that was before him, and Mr. Manafort was not charged in that case with being an agent for the government of Russia. So I think Judge Ellis's efforts to be careful and tailor his words are far from an exoneration of Mr. Manafort on any other potential charges.
I want to ask you as well about Michael Cohen, the president's longtime attorney. And we played in the open some of the tape showing the changing stories here in regard to whether there was discussion or not of a presidential pardon. Now it appears, according to the president, that it was discussed. As an investigator, what do you make of that?
Very, very hard to sort through a basically he said argument between two people who have very challenged credibility. At the end of the day, the strength of Michael Cohen's testimony, potential testimony, is derived not from what he's telling us now, but rather from whatever facts and corroborative evidence the prosecutors were able to glean from that treasure trove of documents and recordings and other things that we've heard so much about.
You're saying don't take him at his word, take him by the evidence he presents.
That's right.
I want to ask you as well, because, of course, the president constantly mentions the credibility that you have and calls that into question. Specifically on the text between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, which is something the president often comments on. You were asked about this on CNN by Anderson Cooper. And you said you had no recollection of the meeting that was referred to in one of the text exchange between those two individuals, which mentioned an insurance policy in case Trump got elected. Do you know why you were personally mentioned in those texts?
I don't. Lisa Page, Pete Strzok, and I, and many other members of that investigative team met in my office and conference rooms around FBI headquarters all the time, right? So it was a intensive investigation that required a lot of attention and a lot of involvement. So I can't sit here and tell you years later the circumstances of exactly that instance that they seem to be referring to in that text. I also wasn't a participant in that text, so I can't add too much more to your understanding of it. I know that Peter has described in his own congressional testimony what he was referring to, and I take him at his word for that description.
Because the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham, has been on this program, specifically referred to those texts and said that it is proof that you, along with Strzok and Page, showed political bias and a political agenda, and that's why he wants to call you before the committee to answer some questions. So one of the other texts there was a quote that said, "We need to open the case we've been waiting on now while Andy is acting." While you were acting FBI director. Do you know what case this is? Why would it matter that you were in that acting role?
Well, again, I can't tell you what Lisa and Pete were referring to in their private texts. I think I've been very clear publicly about how the investigators felt about the work that we needed to do in May of 2017 after Director Comey was fired. They made a recommendation to me that we open cases. I acted on that recommendation. I felt very strongly at that time that I needed to make those decisions quickly because I anticipated I would not be in the acting role for very long, and I didn't know who would be coming in behind me or how they would handle the ongoing investigation that we thought was important to conclude.
Thank you very much.
Sure.